Mizmor, Shir Chanuchat Chabayith, Lithawith. A song at the dedication of the house of David. I will exalt you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up. You have not made my enemies exult over me. Lord my God, I cried to you for help and you healed me. Lord, you brought my soul up from the grave, from among those going down to the pit. You gave me life. Make music to the Lord, his loved ones, and give thanks to his holy name. For his anger is for a moment. His acceptance is life. At evening, weeping comes to stay. But in the morning is joy. But I, in my prosperity, I said, I will never be shaken. Lord, you established my mountain stronghold in your grace. When you hid your face, I became frightened. I will cry out to you, Lord. I will plead to my Lord. What gain is there in my blood when I go down to the pit? Will the dust thank you? Will it declare your truth? Hear, Lord, and be gracious to me. Lord, be my help. You turned my mourning into dancing. You untied my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, so that my spirit will make music to you and not be silent. Lord, my God, I will give thanks to you forever. So, and I was really interested when I was doing a book of poems and putting poems that I'd written a long time ago together with new ones, that actually it sort of changes the way you read them. And I suppose, I mean, the Psalms must be quite like that in some ways, in that whoever put them together was also changing them. And
I think you can't help but be aware of that. It's interesting. I mean, just among contemporary poets that I know, when they sit in corners of pubs and talk about their work, one of the key topics, I think, is the sequencing of a collection. And I know some poets that spend almost as long thinking about the sequencing of the collection as they do on the individual poems. They want to have some kind of arc. And I don't mean just collections that that have an obvious narrative arc or a sequence in the sense, but simply the way ideas or images reflect each other in the poems, the way they're looking for certain kinds of juxtapositions. Because I think everybody accepts that half of the meaning of text is context, isn't it? And therefore, and of course, this was a particularly acute thing for me in my own thinking through how to write David's Crown. Because I'd chosen the Corona form, I had this link. In any case, I was always, the last line of 29 is the first line of 30 and so on. So it meant I really considered the sequence, whatever brought us to that particular sequence. And I therefore, even though I was, say, concentrating fully on 29, which, we discussed last time when I was writing the poem, I couldn't put pen to paper until I had also read and absorbed 30 and begun to intuit what, as it were, these lines, these final lines and first lines are, as it were, shared a landing place and a springboard. Yeah. So I always had to find the point of commonality or the point of interesting translation, or sometimes the way the same line could function in different ways in each poem. Yeah. But I do think that if you're reading the Psalms in sequence, you carry over in your mind the image of what the images they're still working on you of the previous poem that you've read. So I think that does have an effect. And we've discussed that, I think, with 3 and 4 as well. And obviously I feel it very strongly in the sequence 21, 22, 23. But this was an interesting one. I mean, I think you were pointing out to me that the fantastic image of dancing, which you do such a beautiful picture for in your book of praises, which is really proper to Psalm 30. I kind of foreshadow or anticipate it I talk about our drooping spirits, the voice that raises our drooping spirits till we dance for joy. And I realized I was kind of half consciously borrowing a coming psalm, an image towards the end.
Well, let's come back to that in a moment. So I think that's a really sort of fascinating the way that happens in the Psalms, because it happens in the Psalms, I think, as well as, but also in your responses to them. But anyway, just to welcome you again to these conversations. If you've been following them, you'll know that their starting point with the two books that Malcolm and I published during lockdown. This was we've been talking about David's Crown, which was Malcolm's 150 poems responding to the 150 Psalms, and this was my book of praises, which is illustrated translations of a selection of illustrated translations of the Psalms. And as I say, we started these conversations during lockdown, and we've been slightly hesitating whether to go on with them, but I think we decided we will, and we're delighted that Professor Sue Gillingham is going to be joining us as a sort of kind of regular conversation partner, which will be a great honour for us, and really illuminating. But we talked. It was with her, wasn't it, on Psalm 29 last time? So, yes. So we're going on now to Psalm 30, which is again, as you said, that it's an interesting transition. But you mentioned Psalm 3 and 4, and I mean those were linked very much by the morning and evening kind of imagery, and that obviously continues in this psalm as well. But but here, what's I thought really interesting is that we think of the evening as the sort of difficult time, but actually there's a sort of sense here that actually the good times can actually also be difficult in their ways, and I think you make that point right at the beginning of your poem, don't you?
Yeah, well, I think I'm contemplating at the very beginning of that poem the way when joy comes, it comes to us after the experience, if you like, of the heaviness in the morning. And that's part of how we learn to know. I talk about, he gives us to a voice to sing his praises so much the more because we were brought low, that we might know we have a God who raises up the lowly. So in a sense, we have to almost participate in this thing. And I wanted to say that at the beginning of my response to this song, because, of course, it has that wonderful contrast to the much loved and much quoted verse, as it is in Coverdale. His wrath endureth, but the twinkling of an eye, in his pleasure is life. And then that beautiful second half of that fifth verse, heaviness may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. And then you suddenly get, in my prosperity, I said I never should be removed. And then you're down again. It's about negotiating these ups and downs and knowing that God is with you in both,
Yeah, yes. No, that's right. And I mean, it's a very graphic song. I loved Coverdale's Twinkling of an Eye, and I rather actually wish I'd used that, because it does it is a verb that means sort of movement, almost a sort of tiny movement. But with the second one, he says, I think, endurance, and you couldn't say that, but actually it's really the sense of lodging for the night, which I think is even more graphic, when the weeping comes to stay.
Oh, that's very good. Sort of grief comes to stay in your house. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Which is partly why I borrowed the. I mean, for my illustration for that, I borrowed very much the sort of riffed on here the Blake. Death's Door, which is just that lovely sort of. I mean, he did it for. Well, you probably know as much more about it than I do. The Robert Blair poem, The Grave, and he had this sense of
of stooping down to go into it. But he used it again in the big poem Jerusalem, the Emanation of the Giant Albion. He kind of repurposed it, and then had this kind of figure, the stooping figure. Is in the Jerusalem is kind of carrying this great sphere. that they can sort of
yes,
in,
yes, that's
into.
right. Yes, I mean,
And in fact, interestingly, that image, the stooping down in order to enter in, but the entering in, which looks like the grave and gate of death, may well be an entering into life, is was adapted by George MacDonald for his own book plate. He had a book plate, in all his books that did that, which seems very appropriate, say, for a book like Lilith, certainly, where, in a sense, the hero has to learn to stoop low and enter into Adam's little cottage, and that is Adam is the sexton, that's the gravekeeper,
Yes, and it's very sort of, it just seemed to me absolutely perfect for this psalm, because it's very much that sense of, I mean, it sort of, as you say, begins with it has this sort of up and down motion throughout the thing. And it has,
so we were up and down, and then of course we go down again in sort of 8 and 9, and then you get this another transition, in 12. Thou hast turned my heaviness into joy. Thou hast put off my sackcloth and girded me with gladness. That's so many strong English phrases. Of course, the other phrase in this, what's interesting, I mean, I don't know what biblical scholars would make of this, but for readers of the English Bible who in its authorized version and in Coverdale, who carry with them a resonance or memory of phrases, this phrase, his wrath endureth but the twinkling of an eye, and his pleasure is life, is somehow summoned up when you get the great prophecy of the transformation of resurrection in Paul's letters, where he says, I tell you a mystery, we shall all be changed in the twinkling of an eye.
Yes.
Just the same phrase.
Yes. I mean, no, I love that. And then again, it sort of goes on to this wonderful, joyful thing about dancing, and it just I was just reflecting on how much dancing actually, in Orthodox Judaism they do. We don't do it as much as we should, perhaps.
Well, you have those two lovely dancing figures that you give a full page to, sort of whirling each other around, facing this psalm, which I think is very beautiful.
Yes, I mean, that was a kind of, again, a repurposed image, because I did that originally, I think, for an illustration of Pentecost, of the day of Pentecost. And so,
oh, right. Oh, well, I think that's quite appropriate, really.
Yeah, well, yes, no, it's and well, I think actually we could actually go on talking about the psalm so much, because there's such a lot of lovely things in it. But perhaps we ought to have your poem about this, because I just love that in the last line of that particularly, which, but perhaps I just ought to say that before we do that, that if you want to continue, we'll try and do these, they won't be that regular, but we will be, as I say, keeping on. So if you just click the red subscribe thing, then that'll let you know when the next one is coming.
You turn on notifications, it'll let you
know. Notifications, that's the thing. Gosh, we're all becoming so techie nowadays.
Yes, that's right.
Right. Well, let's have. Could you?
Okay. Right. I'll do this. So this is Psalm 30. Exaltabo te Domine. He gives us too a voice to sing his praises, so much the more because we were brought low, that we might know we have a God who raises up the lowly. Riches made us slow to love you, slow to turn to you in praise. But sudden loss and crisis made us know our true dependence on your love. Our days of false security are gone. We fell into a pit of our own making. Raise us up again, each out of our own hell, and give us oil for ashes, joy for mourning. Restore us in your love, and we will tell of how through our long night we heard your warning and heeded you, and found your love again. How night withdrew, and joy came in the morning.
Lovely.
So that was very much written right at the height of the pandemic, and in hope of perhaps the coming relief we're moving towards.